Yeah, I am Ben Marks. You're here at Meet-Magento Spain. Welcome. Congrats, I think, first off, to the Interactive 4 team. This is quite the venue. I can't really see anyone. I see some people in the front row here, but I assume there's a lot of people here. There's people waving in the back. All right, so this is just to talk about Magento 2, what it means for business and developers. I guess I don't have a clicker, so I'll have to rely on next slide from someone. That's me. The table. Oh, this one? Oh, good. See? Community, solving problems. That's what we do all the time. I don't suppose the clicker will work, though. I've never done this before. No. Yeah. No. Can you? Where should I aim? You guys? No. I can go. I can from the peanut gallery up here. Have you tried turning it off and turning it back on again? Hey. Looks good. Maybe I'll just have to walk around. Okay, cool. All right, let's go back a couple slides. We'll go manual. My lovely assistant in the back here. Okay, that's my contact information. I want to get that out there first, like right off the bat. That's me on Twitter. That's me at the email address, and then that's on Facebook, which in some markets, it's interesting. There's all sorts of ways that this community talks to each other. So if you go, for example, here, I think people use Twitter. There's this WhatsApp thing that literally every American has had to install coming here so that we can actually talk with our friends. And then and you go to somewhere like Vietnam. So Mr. Goletz was talking about this worldwide enterprise of unofficial but officially awesome community events. You go to Vietnam, you want to talk to people, you get on Facebook. So don't be afraid to stretch out into different media to make connections with the different developers out there. Next slide. There we go. So change is coming. Have you heard about Magento 2? I'll be selling licenses later here for Community Edition. I'm kidding. Change is coming. Who here has been playing with Magento 2 already? Show of hands. This includes me too. Okay. All right. Next slide. So we started showing this timeline a year and a half ago at Imagine in 2014. It was refreshing, I think, in a way, because for a long time we've actually been talking about the idea of Magento 2 and wondering. Sorry, I'm just going to see. Look at that. Control. We have been talking about Magento 2 since actually it was I believe a very nice guy named Yoav who mentioned it. Maybe at a Meet-Magento event, maybe or sometime. Anyway, 2010. Who knows? It was a long time ago. We started talking about Magento 2. And so when it came time for Imagine last year, and we knew that maybe we, the community, because I was just joining Magento at Imagine last year, we knew that Magento 2 was somewhere closer, but we didn't know when. And so what we did as a company, one of the first things I got to do was to say, hey, just give us the date, and let's make that the date. And so they gave us this timeline. And we've had this timeline at so many events. I've used this timeline so many times, and people still ask me. They say, pull me to the side and say, Ben, when's Magento 2 coming out? And I don't know if they just haven't seen this timeline or if they don't believe us. But as it turns out, in November, you're going to see Magento 2 Community Edition and Enterprise Edition. There we go. That's the response I was looking for. Very good. I'm going to bring you on the road with me, sir. So really the obvious question is, why do we need Magento 2? So, pregunta. We did a lot of cool stuff. How many people have been using Magento 1 for more than 5 years or involved with it? That's a good third of you, I think. Right. Magento, when it came along, if you don't remember the fresh hell that was e-commerce development in the open source sense back in 2009, 2008, 2007, there was this thing called OS Commerce, and it was a real pain to work with. Super brittle, built back in the days of PHP 3, actually it started, completely distributed. I mean, this was a true open source project with sort of this loose group organizing it. And it just, the language of PHP wasn't quite evolved enough. I think the sophistication of the e-commerce knowledge among developers wasn't strong enough. I mean, e-commerce was still pretty fresh back then. And this company, Varian, that's the company that created Magento, they said, we need to come up with a solution for this. And because their clients were becoming bigger and bigger, more sophisticated, and they couldn't support them. They could not be professional development service company and use OS Commerce. So that's how Magento came along in the first place. And it solved a lot of problems for a really, really long time. But in this business, I think we all know that you only solve problems for so long. Today's solution is sort of tomorrow's taken for granted, right? Users, see, we're in this really rapid cycle now where merchants are getting more and more competitive. They're using more data, more insight into what their customers are doing, and so they're running tests. This user goes this way, this user goes this way. Who converts better? Okay, now that's the new normal. And unfortunately, what we end up doing is we end up racing with ourselves, because the customers that get the new feature today, well, that new feature, once it succeeds, then all the other people start using it, and guess what? It becomes the new normal. So this is not only true in e-commerce, but PHP as a development, as a language, as a practice, has evolved quite a bit too. We've got a lot of new tools out there. We've got a lot more specialization in terms of the software that we're using to deliver websites. There's a great one of my peers in the PHP world, Davey Shafik. He's working for Akamai. He gives a great presentation, and he opens it up, just talking about if you look at open source, look at all the lines of code involved. And it's not just the application you're running. It's the Linux distribution that it's running on. It's Apache. It's all of this different stuff that goes together, this big stack. And it's all moving forward every single day, getting better, adapting to people more and more. So we have to do the same thing with Magento. We have to take Magento 1 and say, okay, let's make a break so that we can move things forward. That's why we have to have Magento 2. Some of the highlights of Magento 2. The admin. If I were giving this demonstration here off my laptop, I'd show you. I have it installed, and I'm happy to demo it later with anyone who wants to come up and bug me. I'll be wearing a backpack. I'll have Magento 2 inside, along with some stickers. You can also bug Sherry, my colleague here from Magento, for stickers as well. That's really why we're here, right? More stickers for the laptops. The admin. The admin is, that's the big touch. A lot of people working in the e-commerce space, you think about your merchants, and if you are a merchant, think about your experience. You don't want to feel your commerce application. You don't want to feel the friction there. You just want to log in, do what you need to do for your business, and get out. So what we've done is we did a lot of user testing, and we made some dramatic improvements. We have, for example, the horizontal navigation is now vertical, which in and of itself is not really world-shattering or earth-shattering, but we worked really hard to make it a good bit more intuitive, make it touch-friendly, make the entire thing performant. Now, when we're building stuff, so when all of our Bat developers in the Bat Cave in Kiev are doing their stuff, and in Austin and a couple other places, when they're doing their work, part of their story for building functionality, it's not just saying, hey, users should be able to go into the admin and do this. It's users should be able to go in the admin and do this, and it should be this fast. So they can't actually say, I'm done with my job until it works quickly. That's a really important story to tell because, again, when you have to sit there as an admin and you want to filter orders, or you want to filter your products, and it takes 5 seconds for that grid to come back, that's just another 5 seconds off of your life. You start to pay attention to the application, and all of a sudden, it's not a good experience. So we wanted to make sure that the admin experience was more intuitive, more friendly. Again, it's really worth a look if you haven't played around with it already. There are so many friendly tools to work with. For example, the ability to now imagine a grid. If I was any good at my job, I'd have a screenshot. Imagine a grid with things in it, and imagine columns in said grid, and you can actually drag those columns into the order and orientation that you like. You can create filters and sort things. You can actually save those views and use them later. So you can log out, log back in, and say, oh yeah, I have to do that report every single day. I'll just build it off of the grid. Here it is. That's built in. And now from a development perspective, because this is a talk for developers and merchants, from a developer perspective, it is easier to work with grids, for example, because it's all configured via sort of a standard architecture with a lot of XML to tie it together. Now, I will say this, because I've been telling this story in a few places for the past few months. Don't believe me. Don't trust me entirely. We really need you guys to actually, you guys and gals, to test this stuff out and see, hey, no, actually, Ben, it's not easier. For example, in Zurich last weekend, I was participating in a hackathon, and I actually found it really, really hard to work with the grid. Not because I think it's poorly built, but because it's new. And we need the documentation for it. So that's something that we're working on. I'll say more about that in a moment. Magento 1 really stretched the boundaries of what you could do with hardware. We proved that shared hosting is good for blogs and maybe not commerce. We created a field of challenges. Can you tell? I'm in my marketing mode here, right? So we figured that there were lots of things that we could do with performance. And one of the great things about being part of Magento is in January of this year, there's a fantastic company in the Magento community, Inchu, out of Croatia. You might hear they're having a little Magento 2 focused party next year. One of their really they've got a lot of really smart folks over there, and Marco is probably near the top in terms of intelligence. And in January, he was saying, he looked at performance of Magento 2, and he just said, nope. I said, Magento 2, it's really slow, and I don't think they can fix it. And we took that to heart. We spent a lot of time. We've about 30% of our time working on this, really finding some of the rough edges in the still, I think it was barely out of beta or barely in beta platform, and we did it. Marco actually had to update his blog post and say, they did it. I can't believe they did it, but they did it, right? I mean, this is all very abstract right now. I don't expect everyone to just rush in and download, especially on conference Wi-Fi, Magento 2 and test it out. But feel free later, after everyone has updated Twitter. But we wanted to make sure that essentially we're not going to release Magento 2 and have it be slower than Magento 1. That's not a very good story to tell. So we said to ourselves, performance is truly core. Now, what I mean by this core has a very special definition here. It means that anything performance related is always going to belong to the community edition, to the core of the Magento product. When we get into issues of scale, like, hey, I have 4 million SKUs, and when I try and run this report, I have problems. That's issues of scale. Or, I have 1 million concurrent users. Those are issues of scale. That stuff we're actually reserving, and the architecture around it, we're reserving for Enterprise Edition, right? Because we do have these two products right now. And Enterprise Edition is very important to help fund the whole of Magento, which includes community. But what you'll see in Magento 2 moving forward, things like full-page cache. This is now effected through Varnish, and it's part of the core, right? So this is a huge advantage for everyone that gets to use Magento. We also wanted to release benchmarks, and we wanted people to be able to test our benchmarks because there's no reason to accept the benchmark from the company who's trying to sell you a product, right? They're going to have a particular take on how they analyze those benchmarks. So we actually, at GitHub, you can download our performance testing toolkit, and you can verify what we're telling you about how Magento performs. It's kind of part of being an open company. Speaking of performance. Next slide. Or maybe that's just the last one and I messed up the presentation. Vale. Improved integrations. We also paid attention to what's happened in the market. It's incredible. It turns out people, when they're running their business, Magento doesn't exactly always do everything that you need, right? So you may have to work with an ERP or an order management system. There was a research study done by Gartner where they did a big, broad survey of e-commerce sites, and they found out that the average number of external integrations is 14. The same study, they actually found one company using 450. Just so if you're ever feeling like you've got a complex setup, imagine that company. So we wanted to look at the architecture. Now, there are presentations that have been done on external integrations. If you go to, there's lots of video right now from our core members, from community members. If you go to the Magento Imagine website from this year, we did an entire day just on Magento 2. Much of it focused on customizations. So what we had to do was we looked internally. We looked at our core code, and we moved things around. We built things. We changed things to make it easier to sort of smooth out the surface area for when different systems need to do different things with your Magento install. And that's going in and going out. That's the functional and programmatic refactoring. Improved customizations. One of the things that I love about this business, and I hope all of you love it too, you probably wouldn't be here if you did, is that it's pretty rare that you have a turnkey e-commerce solution. At the very least, Magento has to be really configurable, right? Because you can't just put it in, leave it alone, and it just works everywhere for everyone all over the world. If it did, we wouldn't have a job. So it's a good thing that e-commerce is so individual to each business, each vertical, because it always means customization. And we want people to be able to do whatever they need with Magento. And that means taking existing functionality and changing it, or adding new functionality to the system when appropriate. Magento 1 was pretty good at this. So if you back up to OS Commerce, you couldn't really change the system without completely breaking the upgrade path. Of course, it was moot because they never released really anything after 2.2. There is a 3, but who knows where that is. So for Magento 1, we wanted people to be able to change the system. This is one of the things that blew my hair back That's why my hairline's going back. Blew my hair back when I opened up Magento Core back in 2008, was the ability to change functionality, like actually redefine core functionality and not break the upgrade path. In Magento 2, we want that to be even easier. So we tackled this multiple ways. Developer speak, we decoupled everything. We also improved how you can customize certain areas. A great story for us is we've completely changed the checkout architecture. This was actually a big problem in Magento 1. It was very difficult to customize the Magento 1 checkout architecture. And people wanted to make those changes frequently, so they would use extensions. But those extensions often, because they had to do so much, would break other things. So we took a two-prong approach for the checkout. We actually changed how checkout functions in general. And then we also changed how you, as a developer, can customize the checkout. And this, I'm proud to say, was a direct result of some of our core team members coming to Imagine, coming to the hackathon at Imagine, and just talking with some very experienced developers who were there in attendance. That ended up being their hack, was just blathering on about the difficulties of checkout customization. And the direct result of that is a much better experience for developers going forward. Now, in this delightful era of patches and upgrades for Magento 1, we wanted to talk about improving the upgrade path. What we want is we want people to be confident that they can install Magento and then upgrade whenever they need to. So this still comes down to making sure that you're installing good content, that you have good developers working on your code base, doing things the right way. But what we wanted to do was ensure merchants that, hey, not only do you get a better product with Magento 2, but you also get a better, sort of a better future, right? Because we're going to be doing quarterly releases. So that means 2.0 comes out November. 2.1 will come out in the first quarter of next year. 2.2 will come out in the second quarter of next year, and so on. And these are feature releases. So merchants, you can start looking at this. Once we release 2.0, we're going to have a product roadmap. That means that you'll know the features that are coming down the pipe. And you can plan on, well, I don't think I need to upgrade for 2.1, but then let's take a look down the road for 2.2, and we'll see, maybe there's a feature there that I might build or want to implement in the next few months anyway. You'll get an idea of what's coming, right? So it's not just that you're going to get new features. You're going to have information about these features. Underneath, for the developers, we're going to continue to work on the platform. So it won't just be that you'll see a release every quarter. There will be constant updates to the platform that you can have visibility into through GitHub. And then the big story that I'm telling. Testing is everything. IBID. Untested code is incomplete code. Now, I don't mean that 100% test coverage is the new normal in Magento. 100% test coverage is rarely a good idea. You just need to have enough. And so that's partly on us. We rebuilt Magento. So Magento 2 has test coverage built into its architecture, and that's unit tests, integration tests, functional tests. What this means for developers is you can do your job and know whether or not you're breaking other parts of the system. What it means for merchants is better, faster, cheaper releases. Now, merchants, it's your job to insist on test coverage from your developers. Just say, hey, we want to make sure that we can release with confidence. That when we say, hey, we want these features, when you say we're done with these features, we can put that on our server and it just works. And we know it works. And then when it comes time to upgrade, we can run these tests and tell that things are still working. This is the big story in Magento 2. I'm worried that it's not big enough in the minds and hearts of all the people involved in Magento. But the fact that Magento 1 was built before testing was actually common in PHP means that we've all got a lot of work to do to up our game and make sure that we are making testing the new normal in Magento 2. And that's not just all of you guys. That's me too. I had to learn TDD. I'm still having to learn it. But it makes you a better developer. It makes things better for your clients. So just do it. Don't quote me on that, though. That's trademarked. Next slide. We then, and this is, we're getting really close to the end here. We wanted to make sure that we would do some really innovative things with Magento 2, like documentation. If you don't know, in the early days of Magento 1, it was this really amazing, unseen thing in the PHP world, and there was literally no documentation for it because the company building it was really small, and they just didn't have time. Now, we're a bigger company. We have tech writers on staff. Even with those tech writers, though, we can't do it all, which is why our tech writers did an awesome thing, and they made it possible for anyone with access to GitHub, which is pretty much anyone, except maybe people in certain countries, to contribute. You can either correct documentation or you can add to it. It's just as easy as clicking a link, which is at the top of every page in our documentation, and submitting a pull request with your improvements or additions. We also have launched Magento U. The Magento 2 training is already available. And it's available for instructor-led classes. It's available online. That was something that we had to wait several years for. I helped teach one of the very first Magento U classes, and that was in 2011, right? So 3 years after the release. Having Magento U there now to support developers is a good thing, and we're going to be working on that content. Someone will ask me about certification, so I will say that certification, we'll start working on it next year. I won't promise that it will be delivered. We always build it based on working experience with Magento 2. And then another big note for me, I think, for myself and Sherry, others in the small business team, is new Connect. There's a new Magento Connect coming. We've been working with great partners like Headworks, who you'll hear from Alexander later, to make Magento Connect a joy to use, something you can use with confidence. There's going to be fewer extensions. They're going to be much higher quality. We're actually reviewing all the code. It's a new App Store model. We're not going to tolerate plagiarism. We're not going to tolerate bad code. We're not going to tolerate shenanigans with review counts and things like this in the new Connect. We want it to be like, almost like you pull out your phone and go, oh, I need a drop shipping module. There you go. Maybe a little bit more involved with that, but that launches along with Magento 2. And then, I guess, finally, the most important thing that we've done is the collaboration with our community. I mentioned the documentation, the fact that our community can contribute to documentation, but I'd also like to point out that Magento 2, starting with the developer beta back in December, we accept direct contribution from our community of developers who often know their corner of commerce, open source commerce, as well as we do, and sometimes better. Magento 2 is a fundamentally different product than it would have been if we weren't working in close concert with our community. And all of you, if you're here, you're part of the community. So please keep that in mind. Because this is my mantra. There's no problem the community can't solve, especially this community. They've proven time and again that they've helped countless merchants, countless merchant customers, and especially helped us, Magento, do what we do better. That is where Magento sets itself apart from damn near every other solution out there, is a fantastic group of committed people who are just committed to the idea that we can work together and make things better for everyone. Any questions? Preguntas? So the question is about the basically our migration from Magento 1 to Magento 2. And it's great that someone asks, because if no one asks, I'll usually ask it myself. Migration from Magento 1 to Magento 2 involves running a script that will transfer certain entities from the Magento 1 database into the Magento 2 database. Now, what this means is you'll get things like your catalog entities, you'll get customers, you'll get orders ported over. If I know this community at all, and I think I do a little bit, I would expect other things to come from the community as well. That's what we've committed to from the core so far. And the nice thing about this tool, actually, I believe it was Branko from Inchu, or maybe it was someone else from Inchu. Tomislav's here, he can correct me later, who checked out this migration tool. And what was really cool is it's not, you can run it once, and it'll port these entities over to the new database that's waiting there for the Magento 2 build-out. And then you'll actually get some changes to the Magento 1 database that'll actually track the delta that happens from the time you do the original conversion, so that when you want to port things over, you're only porting over the new or changed entities, right? So it's a little bit more optimal when it comes time to cut over. Now, there are certain things. There's been some massive code changes. So existing extensions, it's a sliding scale from not too bad to total rewrite for those people. We've been working with our extension providers, our biggest extension providers, to make sure that a lot of the most popular extensions, most used, most loved extensions are available for merchants from day one. And then, of course, if you're thinking about getting into the business, now's a really, really good time if you want to get into Magento 2 extension business. Let's see. Themes. Themes are really, really, a lot of the idea, like how themes are put together, that stuff is still there. But the architecture, very different. Templates changed. So themes are going to need to be re-implemented. That's why Magento 1 to Magento 2 is not a direct upgrade. It was believe me, this was a painful choice to make. But in order to move things forward, to set ourselves up for the next 5-6 years, or whatever our timeline will be, I don't want to commit to it, but whatever our timeline for Magento 2 is, we really wanted to start, facing forward, not with a foot stuck in the past. That's why we had to make these changes. But we know it's not a small consideration. So documentation has been built, especially about theme conversion. Documentation will continue to be forthcoming, and we will continue to hold up any community-built tools or content that help merchants move things forward. I'm going to guess that is probably enough time for me on this big old stage. So I will turn it over to the next person. I'll be around all day. I'll be dressed the same, Magento sticker, backpack, very attractive wife with me. And I will look forward to talking with each of you out in the event. Thank you very much.